Assalamu alaikum. This is maybe a first video after some time ago. I would like to begin a new series of videos that is mainly focusing on a new outlook on the Quranic text from a purely Quranic perspective. In other words, I will only focus on what the Quran had to say about certain concepts and notions. And from a semantic standpoint. The reason I'm doing this, it's very simple. As you all aware that any writer in any given era, when they write a book, or he or she writes a book, there must be some kind of a purpose to that book. And the writer often intends to employ various notions throughout his book. From a derivative standpoint, for example, they may employ, or he may employ a certain specific term or a derivative of that term throughout his book. There is no way that these terms are employed if they originate from the same root verb. They would have a completely opposite meanings or different meanings. So that's why the classical commentators, unfortunately, with all due respect to them, they have actually relied heavily on traditions. In other words, instead of going to the Quran and trying to figure out what is this particular notion or word means, they relied on he says and she says of the past. Now that doesn't mean it's bad and wrong and so on, but we owe the Quran to look at these meanings from its own perspective. Because if we claim that the Quran is the word of God and it is written by the most wise, the most knowledgeable, and so on and so forth, then how can we rely on sources which is outside that book? We would rely on minds and opinions other than the writer of the book. That indirectly may mean that God's book is incomplete. And the writer of the book, it does not have a full knowledge of things. That's why we have to go outside the Quran to find out what are these meanings are. Regardless or nevertheless, we respect these past opinions. It might have done some good in its own time frame, but we're not obliged to stick by them. We are obliged actually from a Quranic call to ponder further on its verses, and we shall find its meanings. That's a promise the Quran made. That is why, precisely this reason, I would like to focus on the Quranic perspective, particular on the various controversial verses, which I found in recent history that may have caused lots of discussions and lots of negative opinions, to the point that they have attacked the integrity of the Quran and the truthfulness of the Word of God. And in fact, they have even attacked the integrity of the truthfulness of the Holy Prophet of Islam. Simply because when they come across a specific verse and they go back to check the meanings of that verse, and it's quite, you might stuck dumb in many cases, because whatever opinion is given in the past, it does not really suit very well with the developed mind of the current generation. So for that reason, I will begin series of, if you want to call it tafsir, but I don't like to call it tafsir, but an outlook on these various verses as we go along. I will begin with the first one, which is in Surah At-Tawbah, verse 29. This is one of the most controversial verses in recent history, in particular, since the rise of ISIS in the Middle East and their terrorist activities throughout the world. And that particular verse, it holds within it, at least according to the interpretation, the notion of jizya, that is to pay, to ask the non-Muslims to pay a tax money in return for their life, or forcing them into accepting Islam. That is at least the common understanding of this verse. But I challenge that meaning, and I challenge that particular Sharia provision, which is based on an interpretation of this verse. And of course, I will explain as why do I challenge this from a Quranic standpoint, purely from a Quranic standpoint. And with this, I'll leave you, hopefully, if I will continue my next video, going to explain step by step the various meanings of Surah At-Tawbah. And particularly my focus will be on verse 29, Surah 9, of course. And that is known to be the verse of Jizya. Thank you. Wassalamu alaikum.